Now then, it was the same old story yesterday as Europe's finance ministers again postponed plans to bail out Greece's debt crisis, despite forecasts that growth across the continent is about to grind to a halt. This in contrast to the Eurozone's neighbour, and aspirant member, of course, Turkey, who are reducing their debt while still managing to grow. So what is Turkey getting right, and what can the rest of Europe learn? Well, their finance minister is Mehmet Şimşek, and he joins me now. A very good morning to you, Minister. Is there an element within Turkey now that says just as well we're not in the European Union, given all its problems?
Well, our commitment to EU accession is still there simply because we don't look at EU just as an economic club. We see EU as a platform to transform ourselves economically, politically and socially. So we still look up to European Union for inspiration in terms of establishing a better democracy, a better functioning institutions. So it's not all about economics, but yet if it was purely economics, probably would have a second thought.
Well, I mean, given the history you have with your neighbour Greece, and given a lot of the Eurozone's problems emanate from there, there must be many in Turkey who say, well, we don't want to join that club and bail out the Greeks.
Oh, well, that's... I guess probably Germans are having to deal with that problem right now, French and Germans, because obviously they are having to transfer money to bail out countries on the periphery. But yes, you're right. I mean, there are, people, there are certain circles who are beginning to question the EU accession story. But as I said, my government is committed to EU accession, not because of economic benefits that it might offer in the future. It's more about, Turkey's political economic transformation, in the sense that we still, we're not going to look at Central Asia or Middle East or Africa for inspiration, for enhancing the standards of our democracy and, building better institutions, better governance. So it's really still EU that offers us better standards, and core Europe is still doing well. It is the countries on the periphery that are suffering. And I think it's more to do with institutional setup of European Union. Plus, it also to do with vagueness of certain core countries about transfers to countries on the periphery, which is really an important question. Should you allow the countries to exit and adjust it that way, or should you continue to transfer money to try to sustain something that is not sustainable? But that's something for European politicians to think about, not for Turkey.
OK, well, let me ask you about Turkey and that economic transformation you've talked about, because the debate, as you know, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and so many other countries, is how do you achieve that which you seem to have achieved in Turkey, deficit reduction, at the same time as high rates of growth?
Structural reforms, that's the answer, really. Back in early 2000, 2001, we were on the brink, and we were quite radical in transforming our banking sector. We liquidated some 21 banks, spending almost a quarter of our GDP. But today, Turkish banks are very strong, highly profitable, well capitalized. The capital adequacy ratio is almost 2 times what Basel III requires, which will come into effect in 2018. So it's all about reforms. It's about fiscal adjustment, but you need to have growth. You see, right now in Europe, the reason why credit crisis is deepening, you need growth, but growth expectations are falling. You need primary surpluses, but resistance to further austerity is rising. You need lower interest rates, risk premia, but unfortunately many countries in Europe don't have access to international capital markets. That is the problem. In the case of Turkey, it's exactly the other way around. Last year we had a 9% real GDP growth. This year in the first half we have 10.2% real GDP growth. That is not a coincidence, simply because we've done so many structural reforms on the social security side, on the banking side, on the fiscal side, And I think that's why we have decent fundamentals that are delivering good growth. Of course, demographics matter as well. But I think in the case of countries in the periphery in Europe, sadly, you had too many years of poor fiscal policies, and today there's very few channels available in terms of adjustment. They cannot adjust currency. It's hard to adjust wages, and the burden of adjustment is on French and German and other European countries in the form of transfer to countries in difficulties. In the case of Turkey, that wasn't the case, even though we did get some help from IMF, but we no longer have an IMF program. We've almost paid back to IMF what we had borrowed in early part of last decade. So that's really the difference.
Well, Mr. Şimşek, thank you very much indeed for that formula. Mehmet Şimşek there, the Finance Minister of Turkey, with his almost magic formula there for deficit reduction and double-digit growth.